All right, welcome back to 666 Seconds of Murder. That means each episode is less than 666 seconds, which is, of course, 11 minutes and 6 seconds. All right, well, let's get to it. We don't have a lot of time. Got a good one for you tonight. This is a case I haven't talked about. You don't hear a whole lot about this case anymore, but recently saw this in my news feed and thought you guys would find it interesting. All right. Well, we're talking about John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. I mean, this is an old school true crime story for sure. And more Gacy victims. I mean, we've heard about this over the years, you know, and I wouldn't do this if I didn't think there was definitely some credibility here. And so I'm going to get into it with you tonight. And I'll explain where I'm going with this. So for those of you that don't know, I mean, I think most everybody knows about Gacy, but, you know, there may be some that don't. Or just a quick refresher, John Wayne Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys in the Chicago suburbs, burying most of the bodies in his crawl space under his home in DesPlaines, Illinois. And he was arrested in December of 1978. He was convicted and sentenced to death in 1980 and was executed in 1994 by lethal injection. And I did think it was a funny aside to mention his last words were, "Kiss my ass." So you got to love that. There have been several documentaries, movies, and podcasts about this case. I mean, Murder Metal Mayhem, we've done an episode on this as well. It's an infamous case, and probably one of the main reasons that people today fear clowns, because he was known to dress up as a clown, as Pogo the Clown, and entertain kids at the hospital. Kind of creepy, kind of weird, but that's, you know, where this all comes from, I believe. Now, when he ran out of room at his house, he started putting bodies in the Illinois River. And some have speculated that he put bodies in other places as well. So again, it's not the first time I had heard about this. But enter the name Bill Dorch. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Bill or not, but he's a former Chicago homicide detective who was saying for years, I mean years, even while the investigation was going on, that there were possibly more Gacy victims buried on the northwest side of the city of Chicago. So the murders in the crawl space were in DesPlaines, outside the city limits, but now you're talking inside the city limits. And the fact that Gacy was a maintenance man at an apartment building that was located on the corner of Elston and Miami Avenues in Chicago definitely brings some credence to this, you know, story. And at one point, Gacy's own mother lived at that apartment building. Now, Bill has interviewed people who lived in the apartment building at the time, and one that lived across the street from the apartment building, and even did lawn care at the apartment for John Wayne Gacy. So he and the other witnesses, I watched some interviews with them, very fascinating. They talk about these huge holes. I mean, holes big enough that multiple kids were climbing in them and playing when Gacy wasn't around. And these holes would stay there for a few days and then strangely be covered up and through darkness, you know, in the middle of the night. Wake up in the morning, holes would be filled in. So that's definitely very strange. I mean, even for a maintenance person that's busy, I don't think you'd be doing something like that in the middle of the night. So definitely makes it even stranger that he was burying bodies in the crawl space under his house. So that certainly brings some additional, credence to this story as well. Makes you wonder. So on this podcast I was watching, Bob Motta, who's from the Defense Diaries podcast, he was the one interviewing Bill on this episode that I watched. And Bill talks about going to the police about this. Nobody would listen to him. He was told, we don't want any more bodies. I'm sure they didn't. It was embarrassing. The city of Chicago sure as hell didn't want any bodies within city limits. There was one docuseries I saw in the last couple of years that mentions this, and that Gacy, was potentially burying bodies at this location. But in response to this, the city of Chicago said, okay, well, we'll dig and we'll look. But the one spot they looked at was the one spot on the lawn that the scans they did showed no disturbance of dirt. So that was kind of like here's a bone. We looked, sorry, nothing to see here. But they didn't look where they were supposed to look. So it was bogus. So now he's teamed up with Bob Motta. Bob, if you know, is he's an attorney. His dad was ironically Gacy's defense attorney during the trial. So very interesting that Bob's involved in this. Bob is going to be approaching the home or the owner of the property to see if they'll allow a dig to take place, whether it be in the lawn, or also one of the witnesses talked about the parking lot for the building. When they put the blacktop down, they dug down like 5 or 6 feet. And construction experts said that that wouldn't be necessary when you're doing blacktop. And Gacy was in the construction business, so he would have known that as well. So definitely suspicious. Are there bodies out in the parking lot? Don't have any idea. One of the witnesses said that when he was asked how many holes he would have suspected he would have seen in the lawn, he would guesstimate about a dozen. So there could be quite a few bodies here. And scans they did showed disturbance beneath the ground that would be, it would coincide with, possibly bodies being buried there. So I'll link to the episode I'm talking about on Bob's Defense Diaries channel on here on YouTube. I'll link to that episode where he interviews Bill about this book, Omnipotent, that he put out. And it just came out in September of 2023. I bought the book. I have not read it yet. I just bought it because I'm definitely really interested in this. And I'm going to keep this one on my radar because the Gacy case is interesting to me. I used to play in a band and I wrote a song about Gacy. So it's always been kind of a thing for me. I'm not originally from Illinois, although I live here now, but this case was, before my time, but certainly very infamous and very well known. And so I'm fascinated by it. And this story is interesting. Coming from a former cop and Bob Motta, I actually know Bob. We spoke at the same convention a few years ago. Super good guy. I really like the Defense Diaries channel here. So I definitely give a lot of credence to this, given those two individuals' involvement in it. So curious what your thoughts are. Do you think Gacy's got some more skeletons in the closet, so to speak? I'd love to hear from you. Well, I hope you guys like that presentation and love to get some feedback from you. And if you're interested in what I do, you want to check me out every week on the Murder Metal Mayhem podcast. Thanks. We'll see you next time.